The RMB BER Business Confidence Index saw little change in the fourth quarter as it declined 1 point to a level of 46. It does, however, reiterate that slightly more than half of the respondents remain downbeat about prevailing business conditions. Etienne Leroux, Chief Economist at RMB, joins us for more on this index. Nothing to be too concerned about. A flat showing, I'm sure we can get away with that?
Yes, I think we can. I would rather take a positive view, if I may.
Please go ahead. We look for any positive signs. Green shoots, bring them on.
Well, and the green shoot here is certainly the fact that 4 out of 5 sectors that we cover actually showed quite a nice improvement in confidence. Manufacturing, retailers, wholesalers, and even the building and construction sector showed a very small, though a steady rise, and that's what we've seen over the last couple of quarters. So it's certainly not all bad news. And I think what is interesting is that and at least when we looked at the results from our survey amongst our manufacturers and also amongst our retailers and wholesalers of consumer goods, they all have one thing in common: relatively strong and still strong domestic sales volumes. And I think the consumer is partly to blame for that. So certainly I think we have a situation where consumer spending continues to surprise many with its strength, and it's certainly propping up the economy, and yeah, it's a good story.
Interesting one on that. We were talking earlier on at lunchtime about the leakage out of unsecured lending. People say that they're doing up their homes, but in fact they're actually going to Edgar's. So, you know, is that possibly having some impact, would you say?
There's no doubt. I mean, it's not the dominant driver of consumer spending, because that will always be income, which is a function of employment and your salary increase. But the strong growth in unsecured lending is no doubt facilitating consumer spending. So I personally think we still have a relatively favourable set of circumstances when we talk about the consumer, and that yes, consumers are not spending as much today as 6 or 12 months ago, but it's still growing, it's still increasing. And I think that is certainly a theme to watch still in 2013.
Just going back to the barometer, the majority of respondents, would you say it's fair comment to say that they are relatively downbeat about the prospects going forward? I know we're trying to pull positives out here.
At the headline level, yes. So the index dropped 1 point to 46. So yes, we are in net negative territory. So the majority are still downbeat. But if you look at, for example, at a sector like retailers, that index level is 55. So there the majority is actually upbeat. You think about wholesalers, the same story. The index level is 57. The same when it comes to
so the devil is in the detail.
Yeah, no, exactly. And once again, the more optimists than the pessimists is typically in those 4 sectors that actually shown an increase in sentiment in the fourth quarter.
Lelo?
The manufacturing sector, how does it feel about the current levels of the rand? Is the rand influencing their optimism in terms of how competitive their exports or their products could be to export or not?
I think on the margin. Because I think what is important here, and our own research has shown this, is that when it comes to manufacturing exports, what really matters is whether the economies that you're exporting to are growing. So our exports are more income elastic than price elastic, and that is very important. So clearly, and something what we've seen in the fourth quarter in our results, is that export volumes continue to weaken. No surprise there, because if you're a manufacturing exporter exporting to Europe, which is in recession, and your costs here are growing at 10–15%, clearly it's going to have a big impact on your volumes, and this is pretty obvious in the results.
You've got to follow up.
Sorry, carry on.
What impact did the recent labor unrest have in some of those 4 sectors, construction, mining, and manufacturing?
That's a very good question, because I think that's why the results are perhaps a little bit surprising, because one could easily have expected confidence to fall.
So you've taken a huge knock.
Exactly, on the back of the labor unrest and the strikes and whatever the cases. So the fact that it didn't is actually the positive surprise here, and it clearly then shows that there must have been other offsetting factors at play in the fourth quarter. And one of those offsetting factors, as I mentioned earlier, particularly in the manufacturing space, is the fact that domestic sales volumes came out much stronger relative to our respondents' initial expectations. And that certainly helped production, profitability perhaps even, and it certainly lifted spirits somewhat. Yeah.
Etienne, for my benefit and for those watching, the methodology that goes into the survey, the science behind it,
Right.
is it a representative sample of various sectors? Is there a subjective element to it as well,
It's a
perhaps?
very good question. It's quite important to clarify that. So we cover 5 sectors. And when it comes to representativity, that 5 sectors will probably explain about 45 to 50% of GDP. So it is a nice sample. Obviously, we don't cover the mining or agriculture, and if we did, confidence would have probably been much lower than it actually turned out to be. The methodology is a simple one. When it comes to the headline index, we ask the CEOs, MDs, and we survey about 1,000 of them every quarter, and we keep the panel the same. Right, that's important. So we keep the sample the same, and we ask them the question every quarter. And the question is a very simple one. Do you see the prevailing business conditions positive, negative? Right, and then we calculate the index, and if the index is above 50, it's a net positive territory. Then it suggests that there are more pessimists than there are optimists. So more people that are happy with prevailing business conditions than there are people that are dissatisfied with prevailing business conditions.
Talking about the consumer, we had George Linas in last night, and we were pushing him on his thoughts in terms of whether the South African Reserve Bank governor is going to surprise the market again.
Good.
Are we going to see interest rates remaining stable at this point?
We do. I don't think. I think we're pretty much in line with consensus there. I think the positive thing for me would be if we, and as a central bank particularly, can introduce stability and keep interest rates at these low levels for as long as they possibly can. I think that would be, in actual fact, very good for planning, for budgeting purposes. It will help confidence and probably also the economy. The last thing that we now need is volatility either way when we think about interest rates. So I think just going into the meeting, the central bank will probably have to revise the inflation forecast up slightly. Weak currency, higher oil price, the new weighting in the CPI basket. At the same time, they probably will have to lower their growth forecast somewhat. But I do think the more important factor to focus on here now is the fact that inflation outlook is deteriorating perhaps a little bit more than the growth outlook. And I think under those kind of conditions, you probably would like to keep rates flat.
I'm going to pit Mark against you here. You're bullish on the rand, on the local unit in the short term. Did you say that?
I'm bullish from these levels, yes.
Etienne, are you?
Well, yeah. I have to talk John's book. John Keynes, our currency strategist, and John has, for example, a 830 year-end number for dollar rand. So he's pretty much in your camp, and I think it's a case of once we get over this hump or this uncertainty, if you wish, when it comes to labour and unrest and strikes, and maybe even get beyond December and the political issues, and investor fears calm down slightly, and hopefully things don't get worse globally, the currency will probably respond to that favourably, and I wouldn't be surprised if the rand actually strengthens on those kind of conditions.
Kilo, a final question for Etienne.
From a consumer confidence standpoint, how do policymakers, or do policymakers capture this, the output of these surveys, either in long-term policy or in short-term policies? When you accumulate the quarterly, if not, quarterly surveys that come out, what does the government do about it? Nothing? Does it say, oh, these guys are just messing around, let me leave it all? This is what it means.
I would like to think that the central bank
of course.
focus a lot on our details. The fact that they mention it in the MPC statement tells you that confidence, business and consumer confidence, clearly is something that matters when they deliberate monetary policy.
Etienne, thanks so much for your time. Chief Economist at RMB, Etienne Leroux.